Welcome everyone to the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking's virtual talk, Papermaking as Community Catalyst, with our guest artist, Mary Hark. And my name is Anna Dahl, and I'm the Education Curator for the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. And for those of you who are not familiar with the museum, I want to give you just a little brief overview before we introduce Mary. And get started on the talk. We are located in the heart of Atlanta in Midtown on the Georgia Tech campus at 510th Street. So if you're ever in Midtown Atlanta, please do stop by and see us. And that is all of our social media there below. We'll post it again at the end. It is the museum's mission to collect, preserve, increase, and disseminate knowledge about papermaking in the past, present, and future. And we have several permanent exhibition spaces. We have a gallery that is the history of papermaking, one that is the industrialization of papermaking, somewhere from the hand of making paper to the development of the machinery that makes paper, and a small gallery about our founder, Dart Hunter, as well as two changing exhibition spaces, which we will have an upcoming exhibition opening in just a couple weeks, which I'll share with you about at the end of the talk tonight. Those exhibitions range from pieces from our own collections to collaborative group artist shows to rented traveling shows. So we host a variety of different things. And we have a ton of different education programs that we do, from tours to custom hands-on workshops and bookings to virtual workshops and tours, as well as lectures like we're having tonight, as well as a lot of online resources such as lesson plans and YouTube videos, and even we post these lectures online as well. Normally takes a couple weeks for us to get them online. All right, now to introduce our guest of the hour, Miss Mary Hark, who we're very excited to have with us tonight. Mary Hark is a professor in design studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she teaches papermaking and textile design. She is the proprietor of Hark Handmade Paper, producing limited editions of handmade papers in collaboration with book designers and artists, as well as unique paper artworks that have been exhibited internationally. Her work can be found in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Smithsonian Museum of African Art, the Ginsberg Book Arts Collection in Johannesburg, South Africa, and in many university special collections and in the United States. Hark is a recipient of the 2021-2022 McKnight Fellowship in Book Arts for her work as a hand paper maker. And in 2006, Hark received a senior Fulbright research grant to Sub-Saharan Africa and continues to lead an initiative in Kumasi, Ghana, building the first hand paper mill in West Africa, capable of producing high quality papers entirely from local botanicals. Hark received an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an MA from the University of Iowa in Iowa City. So we are very excited to have Miss Mary Hark with us tonight. Go ahead and take the stage away.
Well, I'm going to talk about my practice as a hand paper maker, and I'm going to talk about my private practice and then the way my community work has evolved really organically out of the work I do in my studio. So this is my home studio in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm going to show you a few images of, so this is, these are images of where I do my production work. It was a 2-car garage that has been made into an all year round workspace. And I know I always like seeing people's studios. And so I thought I'd share some images of mine. So I have Valley Beater, you can see here. You can see I've got a great collection of molds and decals, and my favorite part of this studio are these weights that are tied on these beautiful ropes to the ceiling, where I then can hang papers to dry when I'm dyeing them, or hang them to dry after they've been formed, or or hang my felts. So, and my studio companions, very non-judgmental companions in the studio, Maxine and Millie. I just thought I'd throw those in for fun. I try to do a lot of I do production work, often on commission. Sometimes I do that. I produce things that are just on my mind. I never have the same kind of thing in the studio going on all the time. And I try to dye the papers during the summertime where I can work outside. And you can see those were indigo dyed sheets that were just produced a few weeks ago. I generally work in an edition of 100 or 200 sheets. It depends, of course, on what the commission might be or what I have in mind. I think that perhaps while I don't have a catalog where you can say you can always get these orange sheets or those indigo crinkly sheets, you can certainly know that Mary Hark has an attitude in her paper, and that attitude is what brings other artists that are interested in using my papers in their products, in their projects. So I make the paper, it's flax and abaca. It's a paper that can hold up really strong when it's wet. And then I paint it with a raw pigment, and then I over dye it with walnut dye. Unless I'm using indigo, which you saw hanging on the line there before. Here's a very heavily dyed walnut sheet. And then the sheets are put in through a gelatin bath, and then they're re-flattened. So there's a lot of process that goes into making the sheet, and that process leads to a paper that has a real history to it. And that's what I just love. Like that paper is not clean out of the box. You feel like that paper has had some life before it entered your hand. So here's some of those orange papers glued up onto a clamshell box. And these are examples of small commissions or papers that I've produced that have been used by different artists around the country. Some you might know, like Emily Martin. I'm always thrilled when Emily uses my paper. Jan Owen, a fantastic calligrapher from Maine. I'm particularly interested when she uses my work because the paper, the color and the attitude of the paper feels like it is really contributing to the content that a viewer receives when they see her work. Of course, all of you know, I'm sure, that are here at this lecture, that book making can so often be collaborative. This is an example of a collaboration that happened at the Minnesota Center for the Book Arts some years ago, in which there was a typographer, a book designer, a binder, a paper maker, maybe others that I don't remember. It was a book of local or regional poetry, and I was invited to make the papers for the cover. This is indigo on the cover, and the end sheets, which are made from daylilies and overdyed with walnut, so that it was in the spirit of the work that was being presented in the book. More examples of the indigo papers for a small edition, a small chapbook. And then I also make things that are painterly. They're strongly influenced by my background in textile design. I was trained in textiles before I came to paper, and I use the paper as an extension of the work that I was doing on cloth. One of the things that I love the most about the paper making process is finding surfaces and textures that are sometimes kind of aggressive, but I think they're really sexy, really beautiful. And it seems to extend, if on one end of my table is a big pile of cotton velveteen, which is absorbent and soft and fluffy, at the other end of my table is a stack of paper that might have embedments like this sheet, and is beaten for a long time in the beater, overbeaten material, so that it could be hard as wood. And then I put these things together in a kind of quilt-like, with a quilt-like approach. This large piece is about 6 feet high and about 15 feet wide, and it hangs on a armature which is about 10 inches out in the center. So it's really, and it hangs somewhat close to the floor. So it's very curtain-like. And I think my training and my interest in textiles has strongly influenced the work that I do with paper. These are from a series called Driftless Reveries. I make this drive. I don't know if you notice that I'm here in my office at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Design Studies department. And I have a home and a studio also in St. Paul, which is about 4 hours down the road. So that's about at least an hour too long of a commute. And I don't do it every day and I don't do it every week, but I'm there. I do it frequently. And that drive between Madison and St. Paul is really beautiful. And I often take it at night when the sun is setting. And you know what happens when you go on a long drive? Everything passes through your mind. You remember things. You think about what you just read. You're taking in the organization of the landscape and the color, the season, all those things. I just skirt the driftless region of Ghana. Of Wisconsin as I take this drive home. And I think that, well, let me just back up a bit. I think that in these pieces, I tried to capture some of the attitude of that drive, both the physical topography and the kind of emotional or personal memories that fly in and out of my mind as I'm making that trip. In St. Paul at my studio, I live in a very diverse neighborhood called Frogtown. It is a very large population of Hmong immigrants, but also many Somali, Mexicans, also people of European descent and people that have moved from other places like Chicago. And we are a low-income neighborhood, but being a neighborhood of many new immigrants, it's a super interesting neighborhood, a wonderful place to live. And some of the work that I do in that neighborhood or in my studio, very organically engaged neighbors. I have a artist neighbor directly next door who is a poet, Suini Guyton. And we worked with Suini to create an edition, a chapbook of images and that would hold in a portfolio that would hold her poetry. But also these are kids that that live and go to school within, a couple miles of right next door, right across the alley, and they go to school a couple miles away. I worked on a commission with another neighbor, Seitu Jones, who's an important artist in St. Paul. And we were to make a piece for the local library children's room. And we decided to use kites, to make kites, which are a very universal object. And so for about 6 months, I had kids from the neighborhood come over to the house. At that time, my studio was in the basement. And they worked together to run the studio and make kites. I want to point out this guy in the orange shirt there, Tony Santoyo, who is about 8 years old. He's going to come back, show up again in this talk. But here are the kids running the studio. And after a while, they would be on my porch on Saturdays at 1 in the afternoon. I'd say, come over at 1. They'd be there waiting at 1. And after a while, they started bringing their moms. And it became a really lively production space in which they created these wonderful papers and pulp painted on them. And we also used some of their drawings and silk screened some of that imagery on. And then I wrapped that wet paper that was a high shrinkage paper around kite forms that Seitu, the sculptor, built. And they're hanging in the local library. Another neighborhood project, and this one was a vision of Seitu, in his Create the Community Meal. He imagined 2,000 neighbors and friends sitting down to share a meal. And he's an artist that does many things, but a lot of his work is informed by a great concern about food security. And we're an immigrant, low rent neighborhood where those issues are relevant. So he asked, would I make the paper plates? And I said, no, I'm not going to make the paper plates, but how about placemats? And so we were able to get funding, and I was able to hire neighborhood people who aged in who there's a great age range and ethnicity range. That so we were a group of, I think there were 5 people who were trained as paper makers, and the idea was that they would get paid. They were paid $10 an hour, and we would make the 2,000 sheets of paper. But in the process, they would become excellent paper makers, and they would also become paper making teachers. Here's Tony again in on that project a few years later. There's what was my restraint dryer in what was then a 2-car garage. And we made the sheets in the alley. The content of the pulp was bio waste from the neighborhood. So people brought over hosta and daylily and tulip and bags of weeds, I think, from the alley. Our alleys got way cleaned up, and we made beautiful papers. And then we also took this on the road. So we went to different areas of the neighborhood, and we set up on the boulevard, and we asked a neighbor for their garden hose. And I had an Oracle beater from Lee McDonald that was run with a bicycle machine, with a bike there to make the pulp. And we had all portable equipment. And so we were able to engage people that were walking from the bus, from the grocery store, from their place of work, to make sheets of paper for this project and to see the process. And it was a fabulously successful project. 2,400 pieces of paper later, and any of you that's done production work, it's no joke. We were able to contribute to the meal, which was fabulous. And when it was over, I was eager to collect those papers, and I thought Seitu and I could do an artist book about the event. And 2,000 people walked away with a piece of paper in their hand. It was really an amazing experience, and a transformative experience, and an experience which made it so clear that while those of us that work in institutions such as museums and universities, we do our best to do our job well and to be as inclusive as possible, but there are so many people that don't feel invited, or might not want to, or might not have time or know how to get to that museum or to that institution to participate in papermaking or other cultural activities. And as we took this work all over the neighborhood, it became incredibly clear that that not only was there interest, but the people that stopped and worked with us were the same, had the same kind of engagement as those people that came to the Minnesota Center for Book Arts to take a class. You know, it was just a powerful reminder of the importance of all of us who have access to share that access in ways that we can. There's Tony again. Now he is gone from being 8 years old to being a college art major. And he has since, now he's a graduate, a BFA graduate from the University of Minnesota. But I had a commission for another library piece, and asked Tony if he would take the lead. He had been coming to work with me in my studio since he was 8 years old. Lives right across the alley. Tony's a wonderful artist, a wonderful person. His family is wonderful, hardworking new immigrants. And Tony was a DACA kid, a dreamer at the time. And I don't know what his status is, but you know, he is a kid who it's just been a pleasure to watch him grow. And now I learned from him. So he was at Penland School of Craft for for the 3-year program. I forget the name of that fellowship that's for 3 years, but he was there 3 years, and now he has set up his own studio in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But here he is leading a project. I don't have any pictures of the final project, but we covered more than 200 small sculptures that were like book-like forms with this really wonderful dynamically decorated paper that he and kids that he brought from his community into my studio, spent several months making all these sheets, and then we would wrap them around the forms, and those forms went on a high shelf around the edge of a part of the library. Another project that I work on with a different kind of community, this was about considering flax. So these are fields of flax that are being grown in western Wisconsin. I worked with another artist named Andrea Mickelbust and some some farmers that do small rotation farming. So these are farmers that grow vegetables and bring them around to farmers market. And our concern was whether it would be possible to reintroduce flax into that kind of a crop rotation. So we worked with a couple of farmers in western Wisconsin. We got funding from the state of Wisconsin to do this project. And Andrea is a fiber artist, and I was the paper maker. And you see, I'm holding some of the samples of some of the papers that were made from our product. So then we took that. We took 500 pounds of field retted flax from our growers in western Wisconsin, and we carried them to the only the only place in the world which has which has machines that would be available for small production flax production for small producers. The flax production is generally either by hand, which is very, very time consuming, or it's massive industrial, mile long and prohibitively expensive. So Patricia Bishop at Taproot Fiber Lab in Nova Scotia worked with some engineers. She is a small scale organic farmer, just like the people we worked with in western Wisconsin. And she is really interested in flax production. She worked with some engineers, and they developed the only set of tools that could produce these that would be affordable. So the entire set of tools, it cost about $150,000. And the idea is it would be a shared tool. It would fit on the back of a flatbed truck. It could be shared by all the farmers in a region, not unlike the way wool production might be all over Wisconsin and Minnesota. Small scale wool producers all bring their wool to central small scale production houses for it to be cleaned and carded and ready to be made into wool. This was a really interesting and fun project. This is an example of some of our flax that was bound for thread and yarn. And these are examples of the papers. So I'm going to quickly segue here into the work that I've done in Ghana for the past little bit more than a decade, actually. So in 2006, I was a Fulbright scholar. I had an award to go to sub-Saharan Africa, and I landed in Ghana, which is a really hot spot in the world for textiles. And my interest was in just being immersed in a culture which understood textiles very fully, as and almost all cultural events are touched in some way by small scale artistic traditional production. And I worked with traditional makers. And I worked with, I lived with a family in a small village that produced adinkra, which is a whole other lecture. I won't talk too much about it, but it's a funeral cloth. These are examples of it and of the stamps. But at a certain point, I was really eager to meet my peers, university trained artists. And I went to the university in the area where I was staying, and which had the best art department in the country by luck, and said, well, I don't need to teach a class, but I would love to run a couple workshops. And I ended up teaching, among a few other things. I ran a seminar for grad students, and I also set up a paper shop. And we had 60 undergraduate printmaking students. And at that time, although it's changed a lot since I started, we had to carry our water from another source. We had spotty electricity. It was it was a very modest situation. I charged the 60 students, we paired them up and we charged them with finding botanicals that were on the campus or near the campus. This is a botanical garden type situation. This is a rainforest. So there's so much plant material there. And to come up with a plant or a combination of plants that could make a paper that was beautiful and particular for to this place. And we had such fun. And these students worked so hard. I had brought some small equipment with me. And then we jerry-rigged other things. Here's a small press that we had built. And we ended up making some really beautiful papers, but they were, as any of you that make garden papers know, unless you have the right combination of fiber, these papers don't have a lot of integrity, even though they are tactily really gorgeous. So I went to the Forestry Commission and I showed them, what I did is I had some kozo that I had brought with me as a studio supply, thinking if I'm going to make paper in Ghana, I won't have a beater, and this is something that I can use. So I brought my kozo and we started adding the kozo to the papers that we made, and it exponentially, to the botanicals, it exponentially improved the quality of the paper. And so I went to the Forestry Commission and said, what do we have that's like this kozo in Ghana? Do we have anything? And they pulled out these posters. We were like, danger, pulp mulberry. If you see this devastating plant, call us, burn it. And it turns out that in 1969, 14 plants were brought to Ghana. And they were brought to Ghana with the intention of trying to see if a small cottage industry papermaking could be started. And in the mix of things, for political reasons or who knows, it got forgotten. But those 14 plants were planted in a forest preserve very near the university in Kumasi where I was working. And they languished for a while. And then there was a forest fires. There was a drought, and then there were forest fires, and the forest canopy was raised. And those 14 plants took off and are now the most insidious non-indigenous plant in 6 regions in Ghana. And they are trying to control it. They can't control it. It's growing kind of like kudzu, maybe, in your part of the world. And this is an example of the fiber that is coming from these plants. So if any of you have seen kozo or worked with kozo, you know that this is a kind of generous amount of fiber that, and so at the same time, when I came back from Ghana, from my Fulbright, I joined the faculty at this big research university and was able to, been generously funded to pursue this work of papermaking in Ghana. So we started out by, so these are just examples of the process. And then we decided, what are we going to do? And by we, I mean a group of people there, which was international. So there were Ghanaian and European horticulturalists. There were Ghanaian art education students and art faculty. This is a whole group of people that were interested in. In the image here is Atakwame, a very important Ghanaian artist who passed away last 2 years ago, I believe, and his wife and artistic partner, Pamela Clarkson, who at the time had the only intaglio studio in Ghana. And we decided, rather than start out as a kind of NGO to raise small money to try to, help somehow with the economic problems, we would start with an art project. And so we decided to do an artist book. And we used the work of Konimo. He's a national living treasure in Ghana. He's now 93 years old. And he has played on major stages all over the world. Palm wine is an interesting mix of music from calypso and the rhythms of West Africa. It's a soft kind of folk music. It's beautiful. I'm going to back up a little bit. And we decided we're going to make a book celebrating his life and work as a way of trying to up our production, up our ability to make high quality papers. and celebrate a man who's we deeply respected. This is a student, Rita Yaboa. She was an art education student at the time. And while and she was working in what was the textile studio, you can see in the background, there's a Hollander beater, which I bought from which our project bought from Jana Pullman. So now we had a Hollander beater for beading textiles. With money from UW-Madison, we were able to bring in Ben Mandelson, who'd recorded almost every major musician on the continent, to do a field recording. That's a one microphone recording, to include that recording in the artist's book. We recorded in his open air studio. This was our quality control outside the door. The CD was recorded in Kumasi. It was mastered in London. It was produced in Minneapolis, and the book was produced at the UW-Madison. So here are Atta and Pamela doing quality control with papers, and they contributed to the book by responding to the recorded music with a series of intaglio prints. These are images of the book in process. The little bird there is a Adinkra symbol, meaning Sankofa, meaning don't forget where you came from as you move forward. We made these are the finished piece. It included text from one song that Konimo chose, and you can see in the background is his handwriting that was put on a polymer plate. We had to listen to that recording over and over to get just what he had sung that day, because it's not normally a written. Normally it's poetry that's remembered and recited and sung, but not written. And then we were also put on polymer in Twi, which is the local language. Apparently, in the past, there has been Twi print, letterpress ability, but all of that has been lost. So here are some pictures. Here are some of the beautiful prints that they made that responded to the music and the architecture of the place. So after that project was done, we had gathered, and I should say, I can be sort of immodestly say the book has been picked up by major institutions around the world. So we took this nuisance weed, and working together as a community, an international community, we were able to share our knowledge of the plants and of the music and of the and use the expertise that was local to produce a book that ended up being vetted by major institutions. So we feel very proud of that project. And after that, I did a lot of work. I worked with subsistence farmers. Here we are. I'm training people to identify the plant, the plant that we want to harvest. And then what we do is in the wet season, we clear the exterior bark off while it's still on the stalk. So then, although not always, here it is pulled off the stalk and the bark still has to be cleaned. I worked with at a whole variety of schools. These are design students from the university in Kumasi. I worked with secondaries, these art education students, training art education students in papermaking and simple bookbinding. And then they went out to train, to invite public school teachers and public school students to come and make paper and make books and use that in support of literacy, just the way we do it here in the US. Here is, I can call on WhatsApp and have the subsistence farmer that I've trained say, I'm needing 200 pounds of kozo, and they harvest it and they clean it and they dry it and they pack it in rice bags, and then we weigh it and quality control it and pay them. I can say that's one of the hardest things about the work is working between economies. And I'm looking at my watch here. I don't have tons of time left, so I'm not going to go into that right now, but I can say that I'm an academic, so I have a modest income and I get funding, but I'm an artist, so the funding is modest. It's not like the scientific researchers get. But when I go to Ghana, I'm carrying what seems to be a big bag of money to the people that I work with, and sorting that through that is a real challenge. because you want to be fair. And it's a hard thing to navigate, and I'll stop there. These are Polytechnic students in the north of Ghana. I worked with high school students, Polytechnic students, at art centers. I just went around teaching paper making and we continued to build equipment. This is a hydraulic press made from old car parts. And then a few years ago, we decided that we need to figure out a way to have this project be self-sustaining and not reliant on grants that I wrote in the US. And we thought, there's money in Ghana, it's just not well distributed. There's a lot of 1%ers. There's big, massive houses and big, expensive hotels that are going up. And we thought these spaces are being populated by things that look like old Europe that are being produced in China and Dubai. What if we tried to produce high-end objects that interior designers could use in these spaces that were contemporary, but were drawing on traditional design to give a sense of place. And so I worked with these iron workers, and we riffed off of textile design imagery to create folding screens. Here's the team. To create folding screens that we then covered with handmade paper. We made some lamps and some tables and some other things as well. And we made, I want to call attention to this young man, Henry Obeng, who was my assistant on the project for 3 years, a Ghanaian art student. He has since come to UW-Madison and finished an MFA and recently taught a workshop at Dudene in New York. We also worked at thinking about and continue to work at thinking about objects that we could make and sell that would have relevancy in Ghana and perhaps beyond. So we worked with the leather workers in the north and to create accessories like this. But I think probably the cash cow is going to be the paper bag, which is already on the market in Accra. People use them in a variety of ways like they do here, but people are buying them, and they buy them. Funerals are a big deal, and people put money or gifts to the family of the deceased in a gift bag, and these gift bags are coming from China. So I've been working with Henrietta here, who is a fabricator of paper bags, among other things. So we would make the paper and bring it to her, and then she and her team, which is a small factory on just a small factory operation, making these beautiful paper bags. And I've been working with Duke Amankwa. Duke is, his mother is German and his father is Ghanaian, and he grew up in Ghana, but he went to university in Germany, and he's a designer, and he does wonderful cartooning, but which has a very different attitude than these, but he worked with us, and we're developing a manual for how to make handmade paper in Ghana. It will have some text, but his imagery will help a trainer to pass along the information. And I want to call attention to Michael Assam, who Michael he passed away in this last year, which is a great loss. But he is a administrator at the Forestry Commission of Ghana, and through his intervention, I started to partner with the Forestry Commission of Ghana, and that's the work I'm engaged in right now. So the most recent training, we trained 50 people, young men and women, to make paper, to harvest it, to identify it, to harvest it, to process it, and to make the paper. And the Forestry Commission is currently working at, I'm sorry, this is a little video of somebody beating the fiber, and it's a really sweet little video. So here we are. I thought you would be interested in that. We use okra for our formation agent. Okra is on the market. It's a common vegetable. Anyway, now we're working at the Forestry Commission Training Center outside of Ejisu, which is near Kumasi. And the Forestry Center has a wood training center there, and we're modeling our work after the wood training center. So the idea is to have all the equipment built in Ghana by Ghanaian craftsmen. And then we're developing a 6-month training course, and they're building a bricks and mortar building, the Forestry Commission, which is a papermaking facility. And people would have the opportunity to train to simply be harvesters and people who prepare the fiber, to learn to be paper craftsmen, to pull sheets, high quality sheets, or to be mainly involved in the production of products such as the paper bag. But I'm sure there are other things that that a Ghanaian designer could come up with, which would be relevant to the marketplace in Ghana. So this is the most recent work that we've been doing, and I really am proud of the way the project has grown. This is another video. I'm not going to play it, but this guy is just carrying on about how much he loves the paper and how beautiful it is, and he's quite charming, and I thought you would enjoy it. But if you can't hear his words, it's not worth it. Oops, there we go. And these are some of the trainees from the last training session. This was on the day when everybody got a certificate. Mary Hark felt very proud, and the trainees went together and had this cloth woven for me that says, "Thank you, Professor Mary Hark." It was pretty wonderful. And then I come home, and I love making paper, and I love making papers that I think are really have beautiful color and beautiful surfaces. I don't know if any of you follow my Instagram feed, but I came back from Ghana in the end of July, and I have a bunch of evidence on that on my Instagram page of the papers that I made this summer. The paper, I sell the paper, people contact me. I don't have it in a store, and I don't have a catalog like, for instance, Cave Paper, where you can say, I want 10 that are like this, and they'll always be like that. But everything seems to work out. I'm able to get rid of what I make. Here at UW-Madison, we're starting to work with a horticultural expert on the production of hemp fiber for textiles and paper. And this was one of our very early forays, but these are some of the very first papers that we made. And I'll finish up, I'm pretty sure I'm close to being finished, of some of my more recent artworks. These are from a series called Reconsidered. These artworks are made from offcuts from projects of the last 30 years. I'm an old person now, and I've got a lot of scrap sitting around in my studio. And it's a really fun design problem to put these together and in ways that are both beautiful, but perhaps have some meaning as well. I'm also working on a small library called Material Inquiry. These are an oversized clamshell box that has evidence of the papers that I've developed. These papers, in this book, there's 50 sheets, 50 pages. There'll be very little text, just a little bit. So it'll mainly be a color field situation. I want the book to kind of look like a stack of paper. And so, and then there'll be 5 of these, and then I'm working on four companion books, one with indigo, one with the papers from Ghana, one with textured surfaces, and one with patterned surfaces. That is ongoing, and it ends up being a busy life, but I'll end with the sentence from this broadside that's just part of one of the books. The pleasure of seeing the finished stack of dried sheets, ordinary materials transformed into seductive fields of color and texture, the possibilities endless, each piece potentially home to a myriad of ideas, and each page a world unto itself. So thank you for coming to listen to me talk about my practice and share the ways that I both work privately, but also the way I try to share my work with the communities where I live and the communities that I come in contact with concerning teaching or where my practice takes me.
Thank you so much for your amazing talk. It was truly a pleasure to see all those beautiful pieces and your journey and hear about how you're connecting not only with your immediate community right across the street, but your community in Madison, Wisconsin, and also in all the work that you've done in Ghana. It's truly amazing the number of communities that you've been able to work with and reach out to and bring paper making to and share that love that you have of paper with them. So this brings us into the Q&A portion of the talk. So if you have questions about Mary's work, I know I have a few that I'll start her with one at least, but go ahead and place those in the Q&A so that we can ask them to Mary and get those questions heard. And I see one quick question right here in the chat. What is her Instagram?
It's Hark Hand. I have 3 Instagrams. One is Hark Handmade Paper. One is the Ghana Paper Project. And one is Papermaking at UW-Madison.
So that gets us covered on that one. So if you're interested in seeing more of her work or connecting with Mary, those are some ways that you can do that. We also have her websites that we'll be posting into the chat later as well. But to start out with a general question, as that last book that you were reading the quote on that's printed onto that beautiful book at the end, you do have such a rich use of color and texture in your work. Your paper is so visual. You mentioned the indigo and some of the walnut dyes, but what are some of your other favorite dyes to work with?
Well, I just use paint or pigment that's unstable. And so I get a really rich color, which is also probably archivally sound, and very saturated color. And then I overdye it with in walnut wash. So it's not soaked in walnut, unless I think there was one slide of a really heavily walnut, maybe many dips or really thick syrup. But mostly it's like a patina. And so what happens then is the unstable paint, which is usually mixed color. So if I want red, I'm using a couple of reds, or I'm using red and orange and yellow or something. And it will, move around when it gets pulled through the walnut dye. And then the walnut dye will, it's drippy because I'm hanging it on a clothesline, not laying it flat. And the papers are not overbeaten, but they are not underbeaten either. So in my Valley beater, an hour flax beaten for an hour isn't overbeat, is already a high shrinkage paper. So if I'm making a paper, it's probably around 40 minutes, something that somebody might use for covers or end sheets or I don't know, collage. Those papers, the texture, so there's a little bit of shrinkage, but not too much, but just enough. But then it's painted, it's dyed again and again, maybe a couple of times. Then it's gelatin sized, then it's re-dampened, and then it's put in the restraint dryer. So when it goes through all that process, the paper, the imperfections in my craftsmanship become amplified. And I like that. I'm not like the student who says when they do something wrong, but I wanted it that way. But sort of I wanted it that way because I think that it speaks to the idea of the paper process as being a dynamic process, that it isn't, you can make a simple sheet of paper with cotton that's been put in a blender, and that's it has its satisfactions, but what I'm doing is I'm giving this paper a history. And so the flaws of the in the making of the paper, and then also just what does that material do when it goes through that history of being wet and dry and wet and dry and restraint dried and air dried before it's finished. That gives it a real history. And that's, I think, and that also gives it very particular color.
And those colors are truly very rich and very beautiful. And as you said, that book is like a painting in and of itself with the different pages. Is gorgeous. And you also have these really richly textured papers. If it's not too much of a trade secret, what are you using to
Well,
create?
I don't know. Like the thing is, I derive a lot of pleasure when I actually have the time to do this, to spend a weekend or a week. I could probably spend my life doing this. It would be fine, and not make artwork, just find all these different surfaces. So you use a high shrinkage pulp, and then you try how you dry it this way or that way. You put these embedments in, you pull the embedments back. Like it's plain, and it's plain with process. And I've been doing this for more than 30 years. So I understand the process without having to think it through. So I can just try a lot of things, and some things don't work, but then they work later, or they work, the backside works, or when you dye them in indigo, all of a sudden, wow, that texture, which was kind of ugly, looks sort of beautiful because of the way the dye settles in it. So I even if I wanted to, I couldn't tell you how I got something. And I can tell how I can say I'm interested in high shrinkage papers, and I'm interested in mucking around with the surface of those papers after they're dry. And I have in my bag of tricks all the things I learned as a textile artist. So when you're trained as a paper maker, you're often coloring the pulp. The color is coming from the inside of the sheet, right? The pigment is coating the fiber is making the sheet. But I'm making the sheet, and then I'm dealing with the surface of it rather like a painter or like a textile dyer. And I think that informs the way I play around.
Awesome. So experimentation it's always good to remember that is an important part of the artistic process for sure. And don't be afraid of those mistakes because they can create some really happy accidents. Um, Now, you've worked with a wide variety of fibers, from local fibers like daylilies and hostas that you can find in your backyard to the more common or formal fibers like kozo and even flax and hemp with paper making. I know you mentioned the integrity differences in some of the found fibers that are local versus some of our more formal fibers. But what are some of the other differences and pros and cons that you see of the different fibers as you're working with them?
Well, I don't think there's too many cons. It just depends what is the end result. So if I'm making paper to sew a book, or I'm making paper for someone to sew a book with, I'm going to need a paper that has tensile strength, that I can send a needle through and it isn't going to crack. And so I know that will affect how its time in the beater, but also the combination of fibers. So cotton will make it softer. Flax will make it crisper or harder if I want to go that far. Adding kozo or any Asian fiber to local botanicals will exponentially improve its strength and its integrity without but still being kind of a behind the scenes player. So it depends. If I'm doing a big project at a school and the budget is small, I always add cotton because it's cheap, but I add a little abaca because it ups the quality. And I add a little bit of kozo because it's fun to beat that fiber on those desks, but also because it will allow us to, if there's the right percentage of kozo, it will allow us to brush it up on the blackboard or whiteboard or windows. And so with limited equipment, you can still get a beautiful sheet. I think every fiber has qualities that are particular. and no fiber is better or worse, but the job of the paper maker is to understand what is the palette that that fiber carries, and then how do you process it. So I'm sure that many of the people that are listening learned that paper is made in the beater, that's a really common thing that a paper making teacher says. Paper is made in the beater. How long is it in the beater? Every beater is different also, like, so I would say that I studied with Tim Barrett, and I was introduced to flax and abaca and cotton, and that was a really wonderful thing. And then um, as I began my professional life, I was teaching in a variety of places, and expense was a big part of it. And so I thought about what does it cost and what do they do and how can I make a high quality sheet and stay within our budget. Now, like many of you that are listening, I'm sure we're all so concerned about environmental sustainability and the impact we have. And our impact as paper makers is really, we're certainly impacting by the use of water that we use, and we use it often. We don't have the situation set up that will allow us to use it very efficiently. But I feel like, well, I have a good amount of flax in my studio. When that's done, I don't think I'll ever buy it again. That flax came from Belgium, to North Carolina, South Carolina, and then I bought a bale, and I think I'm going to use discarded clothing and figure out what the palette is there. And that's certainly the way I begin my classes here in Madison, is using t-shirts for the incredible color that you can get from a t-shirt, because those industrial dyes are tenacious, and you can get much more saturated color cutting up cotton t-shirts than you can using pigments. And it's a bottomless pit of waste fabric. And I haven't begun to know what the full language of that is, like, so now I'm adding that because of a growing awareness of how to make a lighter footprint in my practice.
That's a beautiful, important thing to think about, and even something that we're in conversation with some of our horticulturalists on our campus is, what are plants that are growing right now on our campus that we can use to make paper? And we've experimented with kudzu, and there's other fibers that we're collecting from the community garden, other places, that we're excited to start running experiments with ourselves. So there are a lot of plants local to you that can be used for paper making, which is amazing, including the okra. I have to say, I love the okra that was used as your formation aid, because that is very much a loved vegetable by some, hated by others.
Yeah, but it works great with the okra for formation aid. It's just that it lasts one day. It goes bad really, really quickly. But it's on the market in Ghana. And one of my goals for that project was that I wanted to be a consultant, not particularly a helper. I wanted to give information and then see where anybody took it. And that's beginning to happen. And we wanted to use everything that we could get in Ghana so that it wasn't being carried by people from the global north in order for it to happen. And one of the only things that we have is that's the heat shrinking polyester on the surface of the molds and decals. We all order it. It probably comes from China, right? But we're doing as well as we can using materials that are local.
And we do have another question that's come in from the audience. And then I know we're at time, but I'd like to ask you one or two more questions, if you don't
Sure.
mind, about community and your work with community. But the question from the audience is also process-based. Does gelatin sizing help to keep the color on the paper light fast?
No, I don't have any idea what it does with light fastness. But the paints and the dyes that I use are pretty light fast. They're high quality dyes and paints. But they'll rub off on your fingers. And if somebody is going to use my paper to make a book and sell it to a collector, and it's going to go on the shelf with a bunch of other really important and fancy and expensive books, I don't want that indigo to rub off on the book that's right next to it. So what gelatin does is it inhibits the paper's ability to absorb water from the atmosphere. It gives a little bit of a strength to the surface. It doesn't change the way it looks. Although I can use a heavy gelatin size, it gets a little waxy, but it's still subtle. But I use it as a seal.
Thank you. Now, my question for you about community, because so much of the work that you do is working with people in various communities, is if someone else listening to this talk was interested in looking or starting to work in their community with paper or even another art form, what would be your advice to them on how to get started with that, of how to start? Where should they look? Who should they talk to? What would your advice be to somebody who wants to start that kind of community work?
Well, first of all, you have to start at home. You have to love what you want to share. And then you have to master it. You have to work at being really, really good at it. So before you go out to help other people, you have to take care of yourself. And I know that I say this to students. I have a lot of students that are super interested in doing international work in textiles, et cetera. And it's a real danger to go out in the world and think you can fix something before you've actually figured out who you are as a maker and as an artist, as a craftsperson. And you can't, and in papermaking, as we all know who are paper makers, a kindergartner can make a piece of paper. It isn't hard to make a piece of paper, but making a good piece of paper that is appropriate to its end, that's the craft, just like any other craft. So when I was working on that community meal and my friend Seitu Jones said, could you build a team that could contribute to the table? I said, I can contribute a team if number one, they can be paid well so that they can stay and work, and that we understand our first goal is to become excellent paper makers. And they did. They became excellent paper makers. And even one of them went on to get, a college degree and work as a paper maker at Penland. So I think the first and most important advice is make sure that you are really good at what you do before you try to share it. And then I would say, and that you really understand it, like you understand it through and through. And then I would say, look in your own backyard first. Who are the people that you see all the time? Is there a school nearby where you live? Do you have neighbors you could invite over to your studio? Could you have open house days? And these things build, and they build through your experience, and I would say start close to home, start modestly sharing what you're already doing and in your studio. And then it isn't hard to find places. It's hard to find funding. That part is boring and ongoing, right? So you have to also be willing, if your goal is to share it and you have another income of some sort from your day job or your partner's job or whatever, you have to be willing to know that this is, it's very hard to earn a living doing that kind of work, and certainly doing it consistently. So figuring out first how you can volunteer to share what you know in places that are close to home. And if you're good at that, it will just, everything I shared with you, I never set out to do it. It just happened. Like I got a good because I was a low income artist, I got a house in a low income neighborhood. But I had a rich life, just a cash flow problem. And I could see easily, oh, I should have the kids over. Oh, there were days when we were doing that project, there were 4 languages being spoken in my driveway. And little kids were describing to their parents how to make a piece of paper in their family language. That just, and I was only there because I didn't have any money, and then when I applied to go to Ghana, I had no idea, it was a research grant. I was able, and I was so lucky to get it, but it was focused on the development of my own studio practice. And then organically, all these other things happened and I still am at it, So I think using your powers of perception to um, look first close to home. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are things that I learned from my experience.
I think it does. And I truly love the diversity, even in your own neighborhood, that you were able to have four languages spoken. I mean, I think that's one of the most fun things about working at Georgia Tech is we have a very international audience and we constantly have people from all different cultures that we're working with. And there's a beauty in that. And 2,400 sheets of paper, major props to you.
No
It was
joke.
an
It's no
undertaking.
joke. I know it's no joke.
That is a lot of paper. My last question to finish off the night. With your work in Ghana, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about this and how you want to really be hands off with this so that they are taking full ownership over this paper production process. Where are you hoping to continue seeing this go in the future? What are your dreams?
Well, it's a challenge because as you pass off a project, it doesn't go the way you think it should go. It goes the way the people that are taking it on think it should go. And so that's I'm in that place right now thinking about how, but I'm very hopeful about the collaboration with the Forestry Commission because having them buy into the potential importance of this as a craft that could give somebody a small income, to the point where they sought money from the government and got money and are building a papermaking training center and creating a 6-month training program. It might not be the training program of my dreams, but if they can do that, and I can come sometimes, and maybe others can come to share, that you don't know exactly where it's going to go. My dream would be that this would take off. Right now, they're building the building. We hope to do a training before Christmas with the first, like, another 50 or 70 people, and figure out ways that they can go away with a mold and decal and simple equipment or certainly the plans for making things. It's very, very entrepreneurial community or country. So small business is just everywhere. My dream would be that the Forestry Commission can really be successful, and that then selfishly I can come sometimes and make paper and maybe run workshops or bring others who can run workshops. And, it's my long-term dream that I walk away and, you know, and that I contributed what I was able to share, just the way so many of my wonderful teachers have shared really generously with me to give me the practice, to help me develop the practice that I have, So it's like a garden. It's never finished. Just when you think it looks really good, something happens. It's a work in progress. It will always be a work in progress, just like all of our practices are a work in process, like our lives are a work in process, so that's the best I can do.
Well, certainly a beautiful work in progress and a great way to end the night. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and close this out. Mary, thank you tremendously for your fantastic presentation, and Maya for running the chat back behind screen.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who came, and to Anna and Maya for running the show, and to Anna for all the good work she does.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure to get to know you this summer and be able to invite you to be a part of this. And so if you're interested in helping to support programs like this one tonight that we have Mary a part of, we ask that you consider making a donation to the museum, which can be done through https mygeorgiatech.gatech.edu/giving/papermaking dash museum. So please do consider that. And so our upcoming exhibit, I did tell you there would be a sneak peek about that. So that is going to be Build It. It's going to open September 16th and run through December 13th. If you are interested in RSVPing, if you're a local Atlanta resident, we encourage, even just outside of Atlanta, we encourage you to RSVP, which you can do by scanning that QR code. The reception is not going to be an opening reception, but kind of a mid-exhibit reception, and that is on Wednesday, October 2nd from 4 to 7 p.m. It is free. We encourage you to come. And that's what that QR code is for. It is more of a hands-on exhibit where there's a lot of things you're going to be able to move and explore, and even a little bit of a maker space. We encourage everyone that is local to come and make. And even if you're from out of state and you happen to be in Atlanta, stop by. We have some upcoming programs, various workshops. That is our QR code to scan those, from letterpress printmaking with a guest artist who's bringing in his clamshell press, Brian Baker. And then we're going to have, as just talked about, the exhibit reception. We're going to do, as part of the cardboard exhibit, a paper in motion animal automata workshop that will be a little bit Halloween themed with the black cat there. Yours does not have to be black. You can do a different animal, but we encourage you to come to that as well. It'll be a lot of fun. The head moves and tail moves. It's very cute. Here is all of our website, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, how you can find us. And if you're interested in joining our newsletter to learn more about the programs, like the one with Mary tonight, please do send me an email, anna.dull@rbi.gatech.edu, and I'll get you on our mailing list. I did forget one upcoming workshop. We have another art lecture like this with Lynn Sure and Michelle Samore, as they're going to talk about their new book, Radical Paper, Art and Invention with Colored Pulp, which is going to be absolutely fantastic, and that's in November. We hope you'll join us for that. So thank you everyone so much for coming tonight. Thank you again, Mary. Thank you, Maya. This was just absolutely lovely. So thank you all of my attendees as well for coming and for being here regardless of your time zone. So good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.